I will count down from 5 and then we will start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Investment will come to order. Welcome, everyone. I note that a quorum is present. I note for the subcommittee that Mrs. Adams of North Carolina, Mrs. Macbeth of Georgia, Ms. Hayes of Connecticut, Ms. Stevens of Michigan, and Mr. Mfume of Maryland are permitted to participate in today's hearing with the understanding that their questions will come only after all members of the subcommittee on both sides of the aisle who are present have had an opportunity to question the witnesses. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on homecoming, the historical roots and continued contributions of HBCUs. This is an entirely remote hearing. All microphones will be kept muted as a general rule to avoid unnecessary background noise. Members and witnesses will be responsible for unmuting themselves when they are recognized to speak or when they wish to seek recognition. I also ask that members please identify themselves before they speak. Members should keep their cameras on while in the proceeding. Members shall be considered present in the proceeding when they are visible on camera, and they shall be considered not present when they are not visible on camera. The only exception to this is if they are experiencing technical difficulty and inform committee staff of such difficulty. If any member experiences technical difficulties during the hearing, you should stay connected on the platform, make sure you are muted, and use your phone to immediately call the committee's IT director, whose number was provided to you in advance. Should the chair, that's me, experience technical difficulty or need to step away to vote on the floor, Ms. Bonamici, as a member of this subcommittee, or another majority member of the subcommittee, Mr. Bowman, if she is not available. They are hereby authorized to assume the gavel in the chair's absence. This is an entirely remote hearing, and as such, the committee's hearing room is officially closed. Members who choose to sit with their individual devices in the hearing room must wear headphones to avoid feedback, echoes, and distortion resulting from more than one person on the software platform sitting in the same room. Members are also expected to adhere to social distancing and safe healthcare guidelines, including the use of masks, hand sanitizers, and wiping down their areas both before and after their presence in the hearing room. In order to ensure that the committee's 5-minute rule is adhered to, staff will be keeping track of time using the committee's digital timer, which appears in its own thumbnail picture. Members and witnesses are asked to wrap up promptly when their time has expired, or I will gavel you to a close. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, opening statements are limited to the chair and the ranking member. This allows us to hear from our witnesses sooner and provides all members with adequate time to ask questions. I now recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. Today, we're meeting to explore the unique role that historically Black colleges and universities play and expanding access to affordable, high-quality education. As a graduate of Fisk University, I am proud to chair this first hearing to exclusively examine the state of these vital institutions since 2008. And as chair of the Higher Education and Workforce Investment Subcommittee, I'm committed to addressing the pressing needs of our nation's HBCUs and their students, including infrastructure, modernization, improved research capabilities, financial assistance to reduce economic barriers and eliminate food and housing insecurity, and investments to account for decades of gross underfunding. HBCUs have been at the very heart of addressing our nation's long-standing education and racial equity failures. For nearly 200 years, they have provided ladders of economic and social mobility and safe havens for generations of Black students. In fact, HBCUs were established for the specific purpose of educating Black students because other institutions would not and refused to. The majority were founded in the wake of the Emancipation Proclamation to serve formerly enslaved Black Americans, as was my institution, Fisk University. Since their inception, these institutions have survived Jim Crow era segregation, deferred maintenance, de jure discrimination, and decades of persistent underinvestment. Today, HBCUs remain integral to promoting the academic, social, and economic success of the descendants of enslaved Americans and fostering a thriving community for underrepresented student population, including Black students. Remarkably, while HBCUs account for only 3% of all colleges and universities, they have graduated 80% of Black judges, 70% of Black doctors, 50% of Black teachers, and 50% of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus and other Black members of Congress. Unfortunately, many states have chronically underfunded HBCUs compared to other institutions, leaving them to achieve far more with far less. This inequitable treatment dates back to the 1800s, but it continues today. HBCUs are still recovering from sweeping cuts to higher education funding during the 2008 recession, which disproportionately affected their campuses. The recent proliferation of state performance-based funding policies that disadvantage HBCUs is making resources disparities even worse. Additionally, the endowments held by private HBCUs are less than 1/3 the size of those held by private non-HBCUs. To fulfill our nation's promise of higher education for all people, all children, Congress must provide HBCUs with the resources and support they need to combat systemic underfunding and discrimination. Since March 2020, Congress has secured more than $6.5 billion in HBCU funding, including $5 billion in the COVID relief and $1.6 billion to forgive capital financing loans. These historic investments provided emergency aid to help students access essentials like food and housing, and allowed more than 20 HBCUs to erase students' debt. And just last month, our committee advanced its portion of the Build Back Better Act, which included over $30 billion in higher education investments that will benefit HBCUs. These investments are a critical step towards addressing decades of systemic underinvestment. However, let us not forget, we recognize that we still have a long way to go to correct historic inequities in HBCU funding. Thanks to these pivotal institutions, we can all benefit from the contribution of such luminaries as Mary McLeod Bethune, my role model, W.B. Du Bois, Langston Hughes, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Thurgood Marshall, Katherine Johnson, Toni Morrison, Congressman John Lewis, who went to Fisk University with me, and Vice President Kamala Harris. We must preserve and protect HBCUs for the sake of the next generation of change makers and for those yet unborn. So I look forward to working with my colleagues to ensure that HBCUs receive the support that they need so that we can assure that happens. Additionally, in the future, we will host hearings that showcase the contributions and accomplishments of tribal colleges and universities and minority serving institutions, which also play an important role in the higher education landscape. I want to thank our distinguished witnesses again for being with us today. I now yield to the distinguished ranking member, Dr. Murphy, for his opening statement. Dr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for those excellent remarks. I want to thank also the members of the committee coming to testify before us. Historically, Black colleges are an important and critical landscape to that of higher education. For decades, these institutions have provided Black Americans with unique opportunities to pursue their degree and become a vital force in the workforce, vital part of the workforce. For almost 200 years, HBCUs have embodied the true American spirit and have overcome immeasurable challenges and hardships. Today, over 100 HBCUs play a vital role in their communities and are pivotal in the education of our nation's future leaders. This includes Elizabeth City State University in my 3rd congressional district, which I'm very proud to represent. I will say I visited the university many times and have met their chancellor, and I'm just going to call her out here, Carrie Dixon, who is a rock star. She is a true gem in the world of academia, and she has led that institution to develop smart and minds that have critical thinking, that seek out opportunity and succeed. So my hat's off to Carrie. I'll just give you a little shout out there. Yet the financial stress wrought by COVID-19 is requiring many institutions to take a hard look at their business models, and HBCUs are no exception. Colleges and universities of all kinds need to begin asking the difficult questions, including those about financial accountability and viability. One thing we must know that government intervention oftentimes does more harm than good. This is especially true in education. We must encourage all institutions of higher education, including HBCUs, to become more self-reliant and more accountable. Reliance on the federal government for funding is inherently unstable. unstable. While we fully support these institutions, we believe that they must develop sustainable funding mechanisms on their own to ensure their longevity. This goes for HBCUs as well as all other educational institutions. As is often the case, more money is not the answer and does not address the underlying root causes that problems that face institutions of higher education. These colleges and universities already receive a tremendous amount of federal aid. In 2019 alone, Congress provided HBCUs, along with other minority serving institutions, a permanent mandatory funding stream on top of their annual appropriation. Additionally, since March 2020, HBCUs and MSIs have received an additional $6 billion in targeted direct aid on top of their annual funding they receive through the Higher Education Act. This includes $1 billion in the CARES Act funding, $1.7 billion in the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplementation Appropriation Acts, $3 billion in American Rescue Plan funds, as well as an additional $1.6 billion in capital financing loan charges. Even with this massive amount of sending, some folks, I will tell you, Senator Cory Booker and Bernie Sanders, want to see that number increased by another $100 billion with President Biden's Build Back agenda, which proposes an additional $30 billion, that's with a B, in additional spending on HBCUs. This is honestly, these additional funds are questionably absurd. While federal funding may provide temporary support, we must encourage HBCUs, just like every other institution, to be more innovative, develop strategic business models, and work with their private sector to help students complete their programs and excel in the workforce. HBCUs, just as with any other educational institution, also cannot be exempt from accountability. Any institution receiving tax dollars must be held to a high standard. Underperforming HBCUs, as well as with any other educational institution, should not be propped up by federal dollars indefinitely when they are not being accountable. We must assure that all institutions better serve their students. Easy access to taxpayer dollars creates perverse incentives for these institutions to hike tuition costs. I've spoken extensively on administrative bloat, and finances at HBCUs are not exempt from this discussion. Knowing that the federal government will step in and subsidize price hikes allows institutions to then justify indiscriminate spending on this administrative bloat and unnecessary programs. Taxpayer dollars are meant to improve students' educational outcomes and experiences, not the salaries of additional staff and administrators. We encourage HBCUs to increase and diversify their funding streams and get their institutions on stronger financial footing. We all want them to succeed. We all want them to continue to educate future generations. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. I will now introduce the witnesses. These amazing and brilliant change agents. Our first witness is Dr. Leslie Baskerville. She is the CEO of the National Association for Equal Opportunity in Higher Education, a membership and advocacy association for representing HBCUs and predominantly Black institutions. Previously, Dr. Baskerville has served as appellate counsel at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, National Legislative Counsel for the NAACP, and as an administrative appeals judge in the District of Columbia. She is a graduate of Howard University School of Law and Douglas College. Welcome, Dr. Baskerville. Unmute.
Thank you very much, Subcommittee Chairwoman Wilson, and to Ranking Member Murphy. I saw earlier, but I don't see now Chairman Scott, and Ranking Woman, oh, hi there, Chairman Scott, and Ranking Member Virginia Fox. And to the other committee members, it's my distinct honor to be here today, especially to be here on the birthday of activist Fannie Lou Hamer. And to you, Madam Chairwoman, today, which is Jubilee Day at Fisk University, which of course you understand and recognize and celebrate. On this day in 1871, 9 courageous and determined Fisk University students joined with the professor of music and the treasurer and left the safe confines of the 40-acre campus to go out and begin a tradition of raising money to keep the doors of Fisk University open. And to this day, Fisk University is open and thrive, and the Jubilee Singers are a revered part of the legacy and the contemporary offerings of Fisk University. I also am delighted to be here today on the day on which Dr. Mae Jemison, a physician and engineer, the first African-American woman to be admitted into NASA, was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. It's a joyous occasion. It's a great jubilee and a wonderful homecoming. I'm privileged to be here to talk some initially about quickly about the history of HBCUs, and then about their unique relationship with America, and then list 3 things that I think we need to do from here. So you've already heard quite a bit about the history of HBCUs. HBCUs, they are unique in that they're the only American cohort of colleges and universities that were founded by persons who had been prevented, who were, first of all, taken from their homeland in the most horrific conditions and brought to America against their will, with thousands dying from the time they left their land until the time they got here. When they got here, they were stripped of their families, their culture, their language, all things familiar to them. And as they went through the most unimaginable circumstances, the one thing that they kept their mind on was education. And so they got education in any means, but they kept their minds, their spirits, and their hearts on education, the importance of education to get them where they needed to be. And so from this horrific beginning, we began to see the abolitionists and faith institutions establishing colleges and universities, as well as schools. We later saw, with the introduction of the Morale Act, the introduction into this landscape of public colleges and universities for the express purpose of allowing Black people to attend those schools, because in America, Blacks were not permitted to go to school with white persons. There were 1862 land-grant institutions, and under the Morale Act, Congress stepped in and recognized that, the courts suggested that it was unlawful to have public institutions for white students and not Blacks. And if they were going to maintain them, they would have to start institutions for Black. And they did, but there was no mandate that they fund them equally or equitably, and they did not. And so, but that began a long and stony road of litigation, legislation, and administrative fiats and executive orders that brought us to the point where we are today. And where we are today is we're grateful. We're grateful. We're grateful to the United States Congress for the bipartisan and bicameral support that got HBCUs more dollars than we have had, an historic investment of $6.5 billion in 2020 alone, and additional dollars just in the last month. We're grateful. Those dollars have enabled HBCUs to begin to continue their long and stony road toward equitable funding. And you heard already from the chair and some others, the types of things our schools have been able to do. But what we don't have now is an understanding about what HBCUs are. HBCUs are not minority serving institutions. They are historically Black, born of a history, unlike any other groups of people in America, but they are not minority serving institution. There is no requirement, no race or ethnicity criterion. That's important because through the years, as we've developed groups of demographic minorities, and as NAFIO and others have wanted to make sure that all underrepresented students were admitted into excellent and diverse institutions, we created programs for them. Demographic minority institutions, which HBCUs are not. And somehow we're clumped together, and I'd like to talk during Q&A about how we decouple HBCUs because of our special relationship with America. We got the Strengthening Institutions provisions in the Higher Education Act in 1968, in recognition of the abhorrent treatment by America of HBCUs and their core base through the years, 200 years, and now additional 200 years. So in recognition of that, we have executive orders, we have legislation, we have administrative fiats that including the current executive order that recognizes the continuing vestiges of years of de jure discrimination. And so I'm going to talk about that and see what we can do about it. But in my limited time remaining, I want to suggest 3 things that we do. Where we are at a point where our institutions are stronger today than they were yesterday. But in spite the infusion of capital and investments, when we talk about these, we're not talking about HBCUs being given anything. HBCUs are the cornerstone of America. America cannot realize her education goals, her economic goals, her wealth goals, her health goals, sustainability goals, or justice goals unless we have thriving HBCUs because of the data Chairwoman Wilson talked about, and because of the fact that without HBCUs, there will be no excellent, diverse working class.
Ms. Baskerville,
I'm
the
sorry.
chairwoman is trying to get your attention.
I'm sorry.
Ms. Baskerville, the
Yes.
chairwoman is trying to get your attention. Speak up, Frederica.
Your time has expired, dear.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, thank you. I look forward to entertaining your questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Our second witness is Dr. Andre Perry. Dr. Perry is a senior fellow with the Brookings Institution's Metropolitan Policy Program, a scholar in residence at American University, and a columnist for Hbcus Report. Prior to joining Brookings, he served as an associate professor at the University of New Orleans Department of Educational Leadership, Counseling, and Foundations. Dr. Perry earned his PhD in education policy and leadership from the University of Maryland and his BA from Allegheny College. Welcome, Dr. Perry.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Murphy, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here to testify on what I believe to be a matter of national security. From the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries to the tech boom throughout the last decade, government investments in the innovations developed by a wide swath of Americans helped make the United States a sustained global power. However, our standing as a world leader in innovation and in technology is severely at risk. The lack of recognition and investment in Black innovators runs alongside less outlay in the innovation economy overall. Federal research and development investment has been in decline for 60 years, sapping health, science, and educational institutions, including HBCUs, of the resources needed to introduce new products and services to the public. The lack of R&D investment is reflected in regional and racial imbalances that show nearly half of federal R&D spending flow to just 6 states. In addition to these geographic disparities, there are also stark racial gaps. Less than 1% of federal R&D expenditures went to historically Black colleges and universities in 2019. Likewise, my colleagues and I found that only 7.4% of NSF and 6.6% of NIH grant awards flow to Black and Latino innovators, far below those groups' share in the population. The lack of investment is sapping wealth and opportunity from individual cities and institutions. On top of a wealth gap that sees the average white family possessing 10 times the wealth as the average Black family, we see similar disparities at the institutional level. The combined endowment for every HBCU in the country through 2019 was just over $3.9 billion. For context, New York University alone had an endowment of $4.3 billion that year. We cut our noses to spite our face when we don't invest in the assets that spur economic and social mobility. The lack of investment in HBCUs flies in the face of research that shows these institutions punch above their weight when it comes to developing the talent society needs. According to a recent McKinsey report, even though HBCUs make up just 3% of the colleges and universities in the US, they account for 10% of all matriculating Black students. That same 3% produce 17% of all bachelor's degrees and 24% of all STEM-related bachelor degrees awarded to the nation's Black collegians. That productivity among HBCUs generates $14.8 billion in economic impact annually, according to a study by the college advocacy group, the UNCF. HBCUs continue to produce a high share of the nation's Black doctors, judges, engineers, and other professionals, as Representative Wilson has mentioned. HBCUs have developed this talent in spite of less investment and even theft. For instance, earlier this year, a committee established in the Tennessee legislature determined that HBCU, Tennessee State University, never received an estimated $500 million it had been entitled from the state's funding formula. Similarly, in Maryland, after a 13-year legal battle, the General Assembly recently agreed to give $577 million to HBCUs, Morgan State University, Coppin State, Bowie State, as well as the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. We should be investing to expand the economy. We should be investing in institutions like Bishop State Community College, one of the nation's two-year HBCUs, located in Mobile, Alabama. We should be investing in funds to support business incubation at HBCUs. Successful models such as OHub, Opportunity Hub, an Atlanta-based pre-accelerator, an incubator that works with HBCUs to support tech entrepreneurs. As the debate over what counts as infrastructure continues to unfold, too many people ignore the fact that the real undergirding of the 21st century infrastructure, including upgrading power grids, sustainable transportation, renewable energy, requires investments in STEM talent. Therefore, if we want to jumpstart the innovation economy, we must invest in the underappreciated people, places, and institutions that can yield significant growth. That means investing in HBCUs. Thank you, and I look forward to the questions later on.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. We also know that there are some dormitories that still do not have air conditioning. As you speak about broadband, etc. It is totally unacceptable. Our third witness is Mrs. Angela Saylor. Mrs. Saylor is Vice President of the Edwin J. Fulner Institute at the Heritage Foundation, where she manages the Institute B. Kenneth Simon Center for American Studies and the Center for Civil Society and the American Dialogue. She served as Chief of Staff to Heritage's President Kate James in the White House Office of Public Liaison, and as Deputy Chief of Staff to Rod Page at the U.S. Department of Education. She holds a Juris Doctorate from the University of Memphis, a master's degree from the American University, and a Bachelor of Arts degree from Central State University. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Dr. Fox. And thank you, Subcommittee Chairwoman Wilson and Subcommittee Ranking Member Dr. Murphy for the opportunity to testify today. Again, my name is Angela Saylor, and I'm the Vice President of the Edwin J. Fulner Institute at the Heritage Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, we can make no mistake. The contributions of historically Black colleges and universities to America are invaluable. According to the United Negro College Fund, graduates of our historic institutions hold fully a quarter of all science, technology, engineering, mathematics degrees earned by African Americans. Moreover, 12.5% of all Black CEOs and half of all the nation's Black lawyers are HBCU grads. And I am so proud to say I am one of them. Like other institutions of higher learning, HBCUs have worked to weather the pandemic-blown storm by forging new partnerships with both the public and private sectors. The Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, as part of the CARES Act, provided more than $1 billion in grants for HBCUs and other MSIs suffering hardship due to COVID-19. Prior to the pandemic, President Trump signed into law the Future Act, making permanent $255 million in mandatory funding for HBCUs and other MSIs. As a result, over the past several years, HBCUs have seen a historic infusion of additional federal funding. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. reminds us, we are not makers of history, but we are made by history. One of the great lessons American leaders have learned from COVID-19 is that crises creep like a thief in the night, and our best defense toward budget constraints is prudence, ingenuity, and innovation. As the mounting national debt becomes more and more unsustainable, the consequences of massive spending threatens to stifle future opportunities for the next generation. As additional federal spending continues to be our reality, colleges must take the opportunity to leverage resources to their greatest and highest use. In such turbulent times, colleges have an opportunity to prioritize programming and to reinvest resources in a way that advance their core mission. The National Center for Education Statistics notes that total revenue for HBCUs during the 2017-2018 academic year was $8.7 billion, with $1.9 billion coming from student tuition and fees. Compared to the Harvards of the world, the HBCU revenue model relies heavily on tuition and financial aid. Very few have cultivated large endowments, and this has led some to doubt the ability of HBCUs to sustain best-in-class leadership and compete with other colleges for top talent. The Department of Education's capital financing program provides more than $500 million in loans to HBCUs as a temporary bridge as a solution, giving schools flexibility to diversify their revenue streams, expand private sector partnerships, and realign their program offerings to more closely mirror the nation's projected workforce needs. HBCUs, like many colleges nationwide, can expand their sustainability through private sector collaboration, and Congress has a role to play by advancing policies that drive down costs and allow innovation to flourish. It is time for the federal policymakers to fundamentally rethink how higher education is financed and delivered and move toward policies that will lower costs and increase flexibility for students. For both HBCUs and non-HBCUs alike, the introduction of innovative policies such as income share accounts, agreements, and accreditation reform can put higher education on a path to meeting the needs of industry and academia while being good stewards of student and taxpayer resources for generations to come. Limiting the growth of federal subsidies will help colleges focus on their core academic missions while helping students leave school with less debt. Today's 101 HBCUs are adversity hardened and time tested. As an HBCU graduate, I believe our invaluable institutions will thrive, for the ultimate measure of our nation's vitality and strength is the ability of its people and its institutions to prevail in times of challenge and controversy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And let us remember the research that is so important when we deal with our HBCUs that's missing. And now we will hear from Dr. Glenda Glover. She is the president of Tennessee State University and HBCU, which brings it right home in Nashville, Tennessee. She is also the international president of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. That's my sorority, and that's the sorority of our Vice President, Kamala Harris. Previously, Dr. Glover served as Dean of the College of Business at Jackson State University and HBCU in Jackson, Mississippi. She served as she received her JD from Georgetown University. She is also a recipient of a PhD in business from George Washington University. She earned an MBA from Clark Atlanta University and a BA from Tennessee State University. Welcome, Dr. Glover.
Thank you. Chairman Wilson, Chair Scott, Ranking Member Murphy, Ranking Member Fox, and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing this important dialogue on the record regarding HBCUs. I am Glenda Glover, and I serve as president of Tennessee State University in Nashville. Tennessee State is a comprehensive urban land-grant HBCU with over 8,000 students, offering degrees at the bachelor, master, and doctoral levels. Our country cannot reach its goals without strong, sustainable HBCUs, goals necessary to close the education gap, the health gap, wealth, and economic gaps. So HBCUs have changed the college landscape, made enormous contributions, and achieved in spite of the continuous challenges and limited resources. For example, as has been said, HBCUs account for just 3% of colleges in this country, but produce 22% of bachelor degrees earned by African Americans, 25% of African Americans with STEM degrees, 50% of African American school teachers, 50% of African American lawyers, 50% of African American doctors, 83% of African American judges. 24% of PhDs earned each year by African Americans are conferred by HBCUs. Almost 50% of the members of Congressional Black Caucus attended HBCUs, and the vice president of these United States graduated from an HBCU. These achievements were earned despite the fact that funding has been disproportionate. Endowments were 70% less than that of white institutions. HBCUs have consistently had to do more with less. So we are pleased to present this value proposition for HBCUs and describe their funding needs. The Build Back Better Act is a game changer. It reflects the administration's understanding of the importance of investing in HBCUs as HBCUs continue their role in resolving many of the challenges that threaten the general welfare and prosperity of our country. We want to thank Congress for your support last year as you made emergency funds, stimulus funds available for higher education, including HBCUs. Those funds assisted our students when they had to return to their homes and could not do their online assignments because many had limited to no connectivity or no technology devices. So with the stimulus funding, we were able to provide technology devices and assist students financially and upgrade the technology infrastructure to support online learning. An HBCU capital financing program was extraordinary and eliminated debt, and all these HBCUs that had the debt, and we thank you. So today, we ask you to continue that financial support of HBCUs, not just on an emergency basis, but to invest in HBCUs to help them to become more competitive and sustainable, fully benefiting the national economy. HBCUs were founded over 185 years ago to educate newly freed slaves. The HBCUs remain at the front lines of educating students who need access to the transformative power of higher education, despite discrimination in funding, diverted funding, and inadequate facilities. So we're here asking for your assistance. We need funds in several areas. Areas such as deferred maintenance, infrastructure, technology, new academic programs, and research. Finally, we often ask the question, and others ponder it, why do we still need HBCUs? That's the wrong question. The question should be, how did these colleges and universities have so little and produce so much? And how can their model be used by other institutions to advance our great country? That's the question. At HBCUs, we see Black excellence at its best. We ask you to strengthen HBCUs, support the students they serve, and close the gaps by making much needed investments in HBCUs that address historic discrimination and underfunding, and put HBCUs on equal footing with majority institutions. We're asking Congress to right this wrong. It's never too late to do what's right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I would be remiss if I didn't also know that Dr. Adams, the other hat lady, is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority also, and is proud to have her national president here with us today. Under Committee Rule 9A, we will now question witnesses under the 5-minute rule. I will be recognizing subcommittee members in seniority order. Again, to ensure that the members' 5-minute rule is adhered to, staff will be keeping track of time, and a timer will sound when time has expired. Please be attentive. Please be attentive to the time. Wrap up when your time is over and remute your microphone. As chairwoman, I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Dr. Glover, can you elaborate on the systemic underfunding and the impact of that continues at Tennessee State University? The report showed that the state owed you $544 million due to historical underfunding.
Thank you. Tennessee State is a land grant institution. There are two in Tennessee, Tennessee State and the University of Tennessee. These institutions receive funding to focus on teaching and practical agriculture and science and engineering. When I became president of TSU, we looked at the funds that had not been distributed to TSU. We looked at the funding that the other land grant had received and wondered why there was no match for Tennessee State University. Additionally, there's funding required by, that the state had a ruling that Tennessee State will receive 1/3 of the amount of funds that the other institution received. So there was nothing in the budget for Tennessee State, nothing. There was for 50 years, we were back about 50 years, there was nothing in the budget to even account for it. This speaks to a need for more oversight and other areas we can get to. But the underfunding was calculated back from the late 1950s to present. And the number came to from 150 million to 544 million. We're currently working with the state legislature. We're currently working with the committee that was put together for last fall to ensure that TSU enter into conversations about the money that the arrears has owed, and we've made some success on that. We don't know, I can't really say where we are at this particular point in time with the dollar amounts that's owed to TSU, but we do believe we're making some progress.
Thank you so much. And I suppose, Dr. Baskerville, that is true of other underfunded HBCUs. Is there more that Congress and administration can do, Dr. Baskerville, to help these HBCUs as they compete for critical funds? They graduate with substantially higher levels of debt than their peers, and we want them, HBCUs, to have research dollars and scholarships. What can Congress do? What
Yes.
should Congress do?
Yes, Madam Chair. I'll answer the question, but I'd like to set it up in the context that what we have with Tennessee State University is not unique. In fact, it is part of a pattern and practice of de jure discrimination against public, historically Black colleges, particularly the 1890s land grant institutions. And a report by the Association for Public Land Grant Institutions found that from 2010 to 2012, 61% of 100 of the 1890 land grant institutions did not receive 100% of the one-to-one match funds from their respective states for extension and research funding. Go back to the special relationship. When the Congress established the 1862 land grant institutions, as with the 1890s land grant institutions, as with the 1862, they required a state match for the dollars being invested in the 1890s. And so between 2010 and 2012, 61% of the 1890s land grant did not receive their dollars. Between 2010, 2012, 18 land grant universities did not receive more than 31 million in extension funding due to states not meeting their one-to-one match requirements. From 2010 to 2012, 1890 land grant universities did not receive more than 25 million in research funding due to states not meeting their one-to-one match.
Baskerville, let me ask you this. And in response to 2018 survey conducted by the Government Accountability Office responding to HBCUs reported that nearly half of their building spaces on average is in need of repair and replacement. What can we do to fix that?
We need the United States Congress to recognize these institutions as central to the progress of America. In terms of research, we have 11 research institutions that are high research intensive, that if they were invested in commensurate with their return on investment, they would have additional infrastructures, money for laboratory, money for additional centers of excellence, additional dollars to utilize both corporate and government laboratories, and to do a number of things that will position them to move from research two to research one institutions. In fact, NAFIO recommends that you consider an EPSCoR type of relationship for the R2 institutions, where the scientific departments and agencies would pool their resources and work with these 11 intently to move them from research 2 to research 1, so that they can sit in the driver's seat in developing the types of scientific inventions, and particularly at this time in the health field, that can help to move America from where we are today to where we need to be.
Thank you so much. I now recognize our ranking member, Dr. Murphy, for his questions. Dr. Murphy?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. And again, thank you to all of the witnesses coming today. Excellent testimony. And I'll just say again, I'm going to give a shout out to Carrie Dixon at Elizabeth State University, because she has done just a tremendous job at Elizabeth City State University. They have a tremendous aviation program, and she's taken that place from very, very tough times to be an absolute gem within our district. So let me ask a couple questions, if we will. Ms. Saylor, if you don't mind, you noted that in your testimony that Obama era gainful employment rule, that the rule was particularly harmful to the HBCU community. Would you mind fleshing that out a little bit for me and discussing that?
Sure, and thank you for the question. You know, as we look at balancing the needs of students and the institutions and being able to protect both, and you look at the gainful employment regulation, if you will, Trump was concerned, and many were concerned, that harm could come to HBCUs and other institutions of higher learning across the country. where the ability to not define, if you will, the requirements of that connectivity between the program and actually outcome that the student would receive in terms of gainful employment. And so that rule in terms of focusing on disclosure is very important to begin to relax that and create another flexibility for HBCUs and institutions of higher learning not to be harmed. And so, again, you know, we want to make sure that students are going to engage in programs that are going to lead to employment. But at the same time, there has to be a balancing of where that accountability comes and where the institutions themselves can also be protected in their programs that they offer.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, Ms. Heller. You know, I will tell you, I think it's been a mantra that's happened in I'm in medicine. I've been a surgeon for 30 years. So much in medicine now is accountability. And I don't think our institutions of higher education are by any means exempt from that. And I think there needs to be a lot more accountability at all institutions, not just specifically HBCUs, but all institutions, because I think the faucet of federal money has led to some of that just not being accountable. So, you know, I think outcomes are important. I think we have to look at what institutions are doing with their money, and are they giving the students the education that they deserve, and are they giving them what they're paying for? Are we getting the taxpayers what they're doing? So I think this is, again, across every institution. So as the committee looks to reauthorize the Higher Education Act, do you have any specific suggestions as to what the accountability framework should look like?
Yes, you know, there has to always be transparency. I think that will continue to be an essential factor in making sure that the relationship between the student, the taxpayer, and the institution is going to render us what we're looking for. I mean, ultimately, we want to make sure that students are going to graduate and be employed. And we want to make sure that they're going to be able to realize their dreams and contribute to society. And we see in 2020 that just 6 in 10 students completed a 4-year bachelor's degree in 6 years. And so as we're looking at these reforms of accountability, we need to continue to make sure that the mission of what the school is trying to do in terms of the academic onset of the educational experience to the workplace is met. And, you know, it's critically important as well to continue to allow the voices of industry to be at the table in terms of looking at those reforms and how they need to work, and the collaboration between the institutions towards making sure that that the students are equipped to do the jobs that will be available.
Right. I think I appreciate the comments. I just think, again, putting the private sector in, because that's where most jobs are, and they're going to they demand accountability, that we actually have to ask higher education institutions, all of them, HBCUs and everybody else, to put out a product that is worthy of the money instilled in it. So I thank you all again. Thank you so much, Madam Chairman. I'm going to yield back.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your questioning. And as far as accountability, we'll follow up on that and agree. Ms. Manning, North Carolina.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank all of our witnesses for being with us today to talk about this very important topic. I have 3 wonderful HBCUs in my district, including North Carolina A&T, which has, I believe, is now the largest and has had a lot of accolades this year, including Olympic athletes who recently competed in the Olympics, and we have 1 gold medal winner. So I just want to shout out to them. Dr. Perry, you mentioned in your testimony the important role that HBCUs play in educating Black students in the STEM fields. Can you talk about the impact that federal investments have had on the ability of HBCUs to enhance STEM education and support the innovation in the economy?
Yeah, the reason why I talked about the importance of graduates in the STEM fields, because it is clear that the economy is moving towards one in which you have to be highly skilled, particularly in science, technology, engineering, and math. In spite of a lack of investment in those institutions, HBCUs are producing a higher percentage. Now, when we're talking about performance, it's and accountability, there are lots of predominantly white institutions that are not holding up their fair share of the bargain. And so at the end of the day, we as an economy, if it's going to grow, it's going to grow because we graduate STEM majors at a higher percentage. And right now, many institutions aren't doing that, but HBCUs are. And so, and then in addition, I just want to be clear that HBCUs have always produced in this area, but they have been devalued. Less patents are given out to STEM graduates, less investment into the graduates. And so we could do so much more if we saw investments in those institutions and the graduates they produce.
Thank you. I want to do a follow-up on that, because as I meet with business leaders across the country, and this is a moment in time when many businesses are looking for to diversify their workforces. And I hear a lot of them talk about the fact that they can't find people in the STEM fields, and they can't find people, particularly in engineering. We graduate lots of great people in the STEM fields and in engineering. What can we do to promote those graduates and make sure that employers are looking at our great HBCUs for the kinds of employees they say they're having trouble finding?
Yeah, one of the things, and I don't know if you can hold people accountable to this, but when employers say that they can't find Black workers in the STEM field, and they're particularly in the South, they clearly don't have a relationship with HBCUs. And places like Alabama, North Carolina, several HBCUs produce the graduates, but they don't have the connections to industry. And so if they're not going to reach out, we do need to build some type of bridge, and it can include social interactions. South by Southwest, you have OHub, which I mentioned, that takes Black graduate or students from HBCUs to South by Southwest to essentially introduce them to funders, companies and the sort, to make those kind of introductions, because we know so much of investment is about relationships. And so if employers aren't going to just recognize the talent, then we have to somehow make those graduates more visible. So I've been really high on creating initiatives that essentially display the talent. The Bayou Classic, for instance, the historic game between Southern and Grambling, they have a pitch competition there in which they incentivize, or the winner from an HBCU gets a certain amount of investment funds. We need to do just more of that. But let's be clear, there are a lot of people who say that they can't find Black workers, and that's just a reflection of bias in labor markets, which don't make much sense.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Glover, a quick question for you. We're starting to see mega donors who are noticing HBCUs as places where they want to make donations. How do we expand upon this to attract more donations to HBCUs?
I think it starts with having the public-private partnerships and expanding to the corporate community to ensure that there are relationships with the corporate community. So when the relationships bring about more gifts and contributions. And then when schools are doing things that in the community and in the corporate world, in the industrial world, in government, when you're doing things that will show that you're competitive and you have students that are competitive. It's about student success. It's about teachers and faculty and staff coming together to ensure student success. and you ensure student success by putting them in the workplace. They're competent, putting the right processes in place to ensure that they are success and enhance their future. So you make these partnerships and you continue to meet and make more corporate and non-corporate relationships.
Thank you so much. Thank the witnesses, and I will yield back.
Thank you so much, Ms. Manning. And now, Mr. Grothman, Wisconsin.
Sure. I don't have any historic universities like this in my district, but nevertheless, there are a variety of issues I think are a concern across all of academia. And I'll start with Ms. Saylor. I notice in the materials that we have that there are shocking numbers of student loan debt for students who have attended these institutions. We also have the same problem in a variety of institutions in Wisconsin. Some administrators feel that what we ought to do is we ought to allow the universities themselves to have to sign off on student loan debt. They feel that young people, being what young people are, they sometimes take out student loan debt in excess of what they actually need. And do you think it would be a good idea, Ms. Saylor, or maybe one of the other witnesses later on, would you like the ability, do you think these universities would like the ability to say, hey, wait a minute, you don't need $5,000 of debt this semester, you can make do with $3,000 of debt? Do you think that would be a good idea?
Thank you for the question. You know, as young people are coming into the workplace and becoming independent, being able to wrap our arms around them as they're making critical decisions that are going to impact their lives, you know, and the lives of the next generation, I think providing support and counsel to students as they are deciding to take out a loan and understanding what that's going to mean. What is that going to mean in terms of what you've got to pay back and how it has to be paid? What does that mean in terms of the earnings that you're
Would you think the universities would like the ability to say, no, you cannot take out a loan of that size? We don't think it's in your best interest.
I think universities would like to be in a collaboration with students and have the opportunity to give them counsel towards that end. Yes.
Okay, then I'll ask Dr. Glover. Would you like the ability to have to sign off before a student took out a loan?
Well, students have their various pots of money from which students choose to finance their education. And some have more options than others. There are some that have no other option but to get a loan. They have to.
Yeah, the question is, though, the size of the loan. No,
I understand the question quite well. Your question is totally understood. But I'm saying to you, if a student has no other choice but to get a loan, it's up to us to help them manage the loan, to make sure they don't borrow too much money, not money for things they don't need, but money for education. So if they don't live on the right side of the track and don't sit around the table and have someone say, I'm going to cash in my CD to give you money to go to school, we don't have that in our population many times. So those students have to borrow money to go to school. And I applaud them for getting funds to go to school. I'd rather they borrow money and go to college than not go to college. But here's what we come in. We'll assist them and say, you only need to borrow enough to cover this. You don't need to borrow enough for your cell phone bill each month, et cetera, et cetera. That's where
would you like the ability to tell a student you cannot take that amount out?
We do that. We do it at HBCUs. We'll say to them, you actually don't need a loan. We're going to help you find another source of funds. And we do. We have to find scholarships from other places. They cannot get a scholarship. We have alumni that come to their rescue. Loans are last resorts in many, many cases. And that's where we are most of the time.
Thank you. Now, I noticed nationwide we have a problem. I'm looking at an article in the Washington Examiner. Democratic professors outnumber Republicans 9-1 at top colleges. Recently, I talked to a professor at a private college in Wisconsin. He felt less than 2% of the professors at his college voted for Donald Trump. I think diversity of thought is very important in universities everywhere. I'll ask Ms. Saylor, do you feel that where you went to college, there was a diversity of thought, or were there the professors tilting towards one way ideologically or the other? Could this be a problem in some of these universities?
Well, we see studies across the nation, and there is a great tension about diversity of thought in academia. And it is a growing concern. And as we've seen the onset of cancel culture coming from both the left and the right across the spectrum in terms of issues that can be shared, I do think there is a growing concern about diversity of thought.
Okay. When you went to college, did you find a lot of or any Republican leaning professors, or could you tell an ideological sway one way or the other?
I had a very unique experience in terms of talking to others. And I felt that I had a pretty balanced experience there. My professors who were in the field of economics and dealing with kind of finances tended to lean more conservative, Republican, if you will. But in the humanities, I found at times I wasn't sure one's political leaning back and forth, because I found that I got a balance of being able to read literature that espoused different viewpoints. And in my own right, I always sought to try to compare ideologies across the spectrum in terms of my studies in order to keep myself in a position to be able to define my viewpoint for myself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me remind the witnesses and the members, please, in order for us to remain online, we have a block of time. There are other committees meeting at the same time as we are. When you expand your time, you hurt our ability to broadcast to the thousands of people who are interested in HBCUs. And we have thousands on this call now. So let's be mindful of the time that has been allotted to us. Thank you so much. And now we're going to hear from Ms. Jalapal, who is our progressive champion from Washington.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Really appreciate that. And thank you to all of you for being here with us today. I am so proud to support debt-free degrees for all students, but especially those at HBCUs, because these institutions are engines of success for the communities they serve and for our nation. They prepare Black students to succeed, and many are the first in their families to go to college. But we do face a lack of equitable funding that burdens that mission. And as we consider investments we can make to address all the challenges faced by students and HBCUs, addressing disparities in funding has to be part of that strategy if we're going to really improve affordability and success. And I want to thank my colleague, Alma Adams, for being somebody who is constantly talking about the importance of this. Dr. Perry, in the work that you talk about, in your work, you talk about how expected student loan debt is a barrier to low-income students and students of color attending college, especially for students attending HBCUs. My bill, the College for All Act, addresses that challenge by helping low and middle income HBCU students attend tuition free and by doubling the Pell Grant. What impact would investments in free college and the Pell Grant have on low-income students' ability to afford and complete college, especially at HBCUs?
Yes, my colleague, Carl Romer, and I did a study on how the canceling debt will close the racial wealth gap. And we see that the more debt you cancel, the more you close the long-standing racial wealth divide in this country. In addition to closing the wealth gap, you're essentially creating professionals in high growth industries, which accelerates the economy even further. And so the more we can graduate folks from the underappreciated assets in our communities, meaning if you just add water, it will grow, so to speak. And HBCUs are among those underappreciated assets. And so many of them are not receiving the investment, and we could get more growth, close racial wealth gaps, and improve the community overall. And I'll just add this point to address one of the other comments that was made. We really do need a true public option in terms of free college. We talk about holding systems accountable. We actually have that amongst state colleges in a sense of the spikes in tuition have not occurred at the same level the state colleges because state legislatures essentially guard against that. And so let's not conflate all institutions. Now, certainly I also agree we should be rewarding institutions that graduate Black students at a higher rate. And so not to say, hey, only public institutions should get free college, but we should also incentivize those colleges who graduate Black students at a higher rate.
Thank
so,
you.
So yeah. So
thank you so much. And we actually looked at that in Washington State. Because of the state legislature's investments, we were able to keep the rising cost of college lower, but it's still extremely unaffordable for too many. President Glover, in my district, our states and cities invest in tuition-free programs like Seattle Promise, which serves more than 60% of low-income students of color annually, and a third are first generation. It's successful exactly for the reason we were just talking about. It uses state and local funds, but in addition to improve wraparound services like counseling and mentorship. How does the state's failure to provide equitable investment in your school impact its ability to provide wraparound services for students most in need?
Well, it has a profound effect because without the funding, the services are not readily available without the proper funding. And so we're trying now to let students know about the various services, let them take part in the various services that are available. Wraparound services are very important. Housing, what was a quiet fact is that many schools have homeless populations. What Tennessee State we've done, we make sure that students have housing year round because we know the population that we serve. And then the other services with counseling services, students, this COVID crisis has brought about a higher level of depression among students. And students are very eager to tell you now, I need some counseling, I need some assistance. Those days are over when it was taboo to talk about the fact that you needed to speak with someone because you were having some issues. We have telecounseling 24/7. Not just Tennessee State, but many HBCUs have stepped up to the plate and begun to put these wraparound services together for students so students can be enhanced throughout their entire academic career.
Thank you so much. My time has expired, Madam Chair. Conscious of your words, I yield back.
Very much. And now, Mr. Banks.
Thank you. Last Congress, I introduced the Pell Grant Flexibility Act, which would allow Pell Grants to be used for technical education. Unfortunately, my Democrat colleagues on this committee refused to bring it up for a vote, even though it had bipartisan support. Now we are finding out that one of the main threats to HBCUs is their inability to remain competitive with both traditional four-year colleges and trade schools. According to Andrew Kelly of the American Enterprise Institute, only 14% of children from the bottom third of the income distribution curve will complete four-year college degrees. And many of these students will go on to complete some form of technical education. Ms. Saylor, what effect would offering technical education have on HBCUs in terms of student enrollment and competitiveness?
Thank you. I think what's critically important in the days that we live in is to be able to offer people options and choices so that they can tailor for themselves and customize for themselves the professional upscaling that they want in the areas that they desire to go. And you can't find a parent who's looking to be in debt, and you can't find a student who's looking to be in debt. But people are looking for options and ways to get to the finish line in the way that will best fit their needs. And so I think, again, options are critical, and the more options and the more awareness that people have about them and where those options lead them, I think is nothing but an asset to being able to make wise decisions.
Can you talk for a minute about how Pell Grant flexibility would help specifically do that, provide more options for HBCUs to provide technical education?
Well, yes, I mean, it would give the financial support for the low income student who's from the underserved community, that option as a way to matriculate through the system. Some people know directly what they want to be. They don't want to be a generalist per se. They've got their eye on a specific job that they're going for. And that will create yet another opportunity for them to chart a course that may be a better course for their life or a better choice for their life and where they want to go.
Thank you. One of the numerous crises plaguing higher education is the disappearance of men. According to the Wall Street Journal, men now make up only 40% of students enrolled in traditional four-year universities. However, this discrepancy is even more stark at HBCUs. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, female enrollment at HBCUs has been higher than male enrollment every year since 1976. The percentage of female enrollment at HBCUs increased from 53% in 1976 to 63% in 2019, which is higher than the national average. Ms. Saylor, what is the root cause of the drastic gender disparity at HBCUs, and what effect does this have on minority communities as a whole?
Well, I think when you look at the Black male population across the board, and we look at high prison rates, and we look at the distribution of opportunities against females and males. This is a challenge for us as a nation across the board. So I think it's hard to take that conversation and just narrow it down to just specifically historically Black colleges and universities. But across the nation, we have an issue with what is happening to the Black male in our country and the leadership opportunity there.
Can you talk at all about what HBCUs are doing to address the gender gap?
Well, I mean, as I look and talk to leaders in the HBCU community, there are major efforts in terms of trying to do recruitment and looking at partnerships even before students graduate from high school in terms of creating interest and opportunities there. You see a lot of this happening with the ROTC programs and the junior ROTC programs towards getting interest of males into higher education and on the HBCU campuses towards that end, which also creates opportunities for funding of their education as they begin to serve our nation.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you so much. Such an important topic. And that's why Congress has established the Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys. And on this committee today, there are 3 members, Mr. Bowman, myself, and Ms. Macbeth. We have found that on our HBCU campuses, 70% of the student body are female students. In Atlanta, only Spelman College exceeds that, and they are all girls' college. In fact, I worked with Tennessee State this last school year, to help increase their Black male population by sending them 12 Black boys to Tennessee State from Jacksonville, Florida, and Miami-Dade County, Florida, to help incentivize other Black males to attend college. And you've got to do that from beginning in the 3rd grade. So thank you so much for that. That's just right down my alley. And our next witness, our next member is down his alley too. We're both former principals. Mr. Bowman of New York.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I rarely, if ever, disagree with you, but I'm going to slightly disagree that we need to begin the college-bound process in pre-K. our young, with our young men, just to plant the seeds before they even start kindergarten. First, I want to thank our witnesses for being here today and to express a special thank you to the HBCU caucus founder and co-chair, Congresswoman Adams, as well as to Chairwoman Wilson for their continued relentless advocacy and leadership over the years and in making this hearing happen today. While there are no HBCUs in my district where I represent parts of Westchester and the Bronx, by the way, we may need to talk about that Chairwoman. You know, all the HBCUs are in the South. You know, I'm up here in the Northeast. You know, we could get one or two in the Northeast. Well, there is one, Mega Evers in Brooklyn. We need one in the Bronx. I do have constituents who attend HBCUs out of state, and it's important to ensure that opportunity remains an option for generations of Black students to come. I had a question about STEM education for Dr. Baskerville. Dr. Baskerville, thank you so much for your testimony today. I'd like to discuss STEM investments in HBCUs. In addition to sitting on this committee, I serve as a subcommittee chair on energy for the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. On both committees, it is clear to me we need to do more in STEM education, not only in higher education, but in K-12 as well. Studies have shown that the percentage of Black students earning STEM bachelor's degrees nationwide has declined in recent years. But we also know that HBCUs play an outsized role in awarding STEM degrees to Black students. So my question is, what do HBCUs do differently from non-HBCUs in this regard? And what lessons can other colleges and universities learn from HBCUs about effective STEM education and exposure to STEM career opportunities?
Thank you so very, very much, Congressman Bowman. I'd like to say that we're delighted that you do have predominantly Black institutions that NAFIO work to help, and Medgar Evers is one, LaGuardia is one. I think 3 or 4 of the CUNY colleges are PBIs, and they align with NAFIO that also has that subset. Relative to STEM, HBCUs are doing a number of things, as you suggest, to begin pre-K and work your ways up. One of the things that NAFIO did for 10 years in a partnership with NIDA, National Telecommunications Information Administration, was to shape and then execute and evaluate techno scholars. All the data suggested that boys are interested in technology, and if you keep them busy on whatever are the current technological devices, they will excel. So we identified 6 HBCUs. We were able to get them technology devices, and we found that we partnered them with young men at the HBCUs who were mentors. So they had a mentor that looked like them, came from their background and so forth, and they had the devices. Their graduation rates went up substantially as compared with the Black men that were in their class that were not techno scholars. So they got their lessons on the technology, and as rewards, they were given games, programs that they enjoyed playing. There's another group, Quality Education for Minorities, that Dr. Ivory Tolson was the last president, but they're also looking for innovative ways to engage in the pipeline with the TRIO programs. TRIO in the last few years with tremendous support from Chairman Scott and others on this committee, started a program, Upward Bound STEM, recognizing that in that 10th grade, if you focus on STEM, you can work. So we're doing many things. There's a lot more that we can do, but now we're evaluating, and hopefully we'll have a report on which ones seem to be most promising.
Thank you so much for that response. As a middle school principal, I was one of the only middle schools in the Bronx to offer a computer science program to our kids. And that's something, as we think about K-12 schools, I think we could do a lot more of in partnership with HBCUs. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Bowman. And I would be remiss if I did not recognize Chairman Scott and his work with Black boys and men also today. And now our next member, Ms. Miller Meeks of Iowa.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member Fox, and thank you to all of our panelists for this very interesting discussion. I've had the opportunity to visit several HBCUs, not in my state, but elsewhere, and have always been impressed with the work that they do. And this wasn't originally the where I was going to go with my questioning, but I'm going to follow up on something that Representative Banks had asked earlier. I'm a 24-year military veteran, left home at 16, the fourth of 8 kids in order to find a way to get to medical school. And so I thought it was interesting, one of the comments that you had made earlier, Ms. Saylor, in your testimony, both in your testimony, your written testimony, and then your comments to Representative Banks in trying to get young Black men into college and to address the gender gap and gender disparity. But you mentioned the HBCU's collaboration with Reserve Officer Training Courses, Corps or ROTC, on campuses to cultivate future military officers. And that said, 25% of the HBCUs currently participate in a ROTC program. Are there specific barriers preventing more HBCUs from collaboration? I think this would be a win-win both for our country, for Black men and for HBCUs.
Thank you for the question. And I have to say this as well. My husband and I have 2 children at West Point. And
oh my gosh,
we just have a special place in our heart for that type of training. I have a son, and I can't imagine wanting him in a more secure discipline program, if you will, as he's becoming a young man. But as we have at the Heritage Foundation been working with ROTC programs on HBCU campuses, one of the things that we notice, and in terms of conversation about some of the barriers, is, it requires funding. And we see that collaboration has come into play as a way to overcome that barrier, where you've got, like in the state of Virginia, where Hampton universities and others collaborate together and bring those university systems together to use those resources collectively. We even see that happening at institutions like Harvard and MIT, where they collaborate those resources together in order to give those students the best experience that they can have and the best exposures that they can have. And so I think it's super important as we continue to look at this as a model. There is another instance here in terms of looking at making sure that the workplace development piece is synced and lined with the need. And one of the areas where we've talked with HBCUs is that cybersecurity area is not as strong as it could be in terms of looking at military preparedness. And there are several of the institutions that are looking at how to funnel and channel and collaborate to make those areas of study stronger.
So it's interesting you're bringing that up, because Representative Bowman just talked about STEM education, and I think Mr. Perry did in his testimony as well, and the success in HBCUs in graduating in science degrees and further science degrees and computer technological. So is there something, certainly that's a value to the military. It's a value to their education, and would certainly facilitate careers in technology, in computer, in cybersecurity, which we know from recent events is critically important to our nation. So is there something that we can do in Congress to help facilitate that collaboration?
Yes, I think as we make this more and more of a priority, as we talk about policy and the need for military preparedness, I think it is especially important because it puts HBCUs again in a conversation about being an American asset that's being bolstered towards competitiveness and military preparedness. And so I think that, from a public relations standpoint and from a programmatic standpoint, it is essential for us to continue these conversations and look at policies that expand opportunities there.
Great. Thank you so much for your testimony and those of our witnesses. And Madam Chair, I yield back my time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now my friend from New York, Mr. Hbcus.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you so much for allowing me to ask some of the questions. My first question is, how has the lack of funding or the disparity in funding at the HBCUs contributed to any issues with student retention? Anybody that would like to answer that? Dr. Glenda Baskin-Glover? If you have
Sure.
any.
Well, the various needs of HBCUs span across several categories, and most of those categories affect whether or not students attend your university, and sometimes where they return. The needs are so great in various areas. The infrastructure and deferred maintenance, that's a huge one for HBCUs and schools. Some of the schools are crumbling. The infrastructure needs extensive work. I've spoken to other college presidents. The deferred maintenance can be as high as 100 million, 200 million. It's 300 million on Tennessee State's campus. That's how much, how deferred maintenance, that means where you learn and where you live. That's where that becomes so important. When it rains outside, many times it rains inside also. So infrastructure is one. The technology, students want to understand they live in technological age. They want to have the various types of technology, including advanced computing capabilities and networks. So the funding that has been denied over the years, the systemic historical diverted funding that HBCUs have not received, that makes a difference when students are looking at schools. And then the programs. Funding, lack of funding has resulted in various programs not being able to be offered at various universities. And then of course the research. I don't know, many students don't really say no to a school because of research, but they definitely will look at the other areas, the campus as a whole, and the offerings that are there. So that helps with, that hurts and helps with recruiting and retention.
But even with these disadvantages, right? HBCUs and the Hispanic serving institutions, as well as other minority serving institutions, have contributed to closing the racial and ethnic wealth gap in higher education. Do you have any data of the important role that these institutions have played in closing the wealth gap by the opportunities that even within these disadvantages are presented to students?
Well, even with the lack of funding, HBCUs have excelled, and we won't have to go over the stats anymore. But if you take a student who would have gone to college, who didn't go for whatever reason, we've reached out to students, they didn't have the funding. Lack of funding prevents students from going to school. There's no scholarship money available. There are other pots of funds that are not available. And so then you become one of the statistics. If you make the average, I think BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, said a student graduating from high school makes on average $37,000 a year. And in college, I think it was $61,000. They work 40 years. So if you look at that difference of $24,000 or so a year, for 40 years, that's almost $1 million a year that student has not earned, has not made because of not going to college because of lack of funding.
May I ask, can I respond just quickly to that? Let's also remember that Black graduates, collegiate graduates have a much lower wealth profile than their white counterparts, earn less money. And so they're not, where our economic mobility is throttled by discrimination in other areas. And so that we can't ignore that part. Black people are going to school and taking on more debt, and it's not the education is not playing out the same way it does for their white counterparts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just let me say in closing that in New York State, I was involved in a lawsuit that established disparities in funding, regional disparities in funding in the New York City public school system. It was a campaign fiscal equity. And monies eventually were allocated by the courts, both for capital improvement of the schools as well as operational. I think that there's a lot of similarities in the years of disparities in funding given to HBCUs and other minority serving institutions. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now, Mrs. McLean of Michigan. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our guests today. I really appreciate the efforts in which you're doing. I think we all share the same thought process in terms of if we can get our younger generation, our youth, educated and provide them an opportunity to get a good, well-paying job, that just solves so many problems down the road, and it really begins to give them a sense of pride, and I think you see that passed down from generation to generation. So I applaud all of our efforts. I have a few clarifying questions that this is my first time on this committee, so I want to make sure I understand it. We had talked earlier about endowments, and if we're producing at such a higher rate from these colleges, why do you think our endowments are suffering?
Well, endowments are created not only from individual contributions, but through other federal and state investments. And so overall, in a nutshell, HBCUs enroll much less low wealth, many more low wealth individuals. So even the graduates that go on are in a job market that throttles their wealth even further. And so from an individual perspective, they receive less contribution from a federal
okay, I think I understand. In the interest of time, I don't need to be rude or cut you off.
Go for it.
So for example, I graduated from Northwood University. Northwood University, which is a private college, which has a really good endowment fund, they would get federal monies?
No, okay, that's just one of the ways. But also remember, there's lots of endowments that, I hate to put a damper on this, were created from cotton money, alcohol money. Colleges and universities participated.
I understand. That helps me. I appreciate it, sir. Okay. I'm trying to connect the dots, because I do think the most important thing that we can give our youth today is a job. I mean, when you think about it, a job provides pride, sense of purpose, right? It breaks the cycle. It allows people to pay taxes. It allows people to give back. I mean, I'm in agreement. I'm asking again, perhaps our ladder maybe, do you think is maybe on the wrong wall for a moment? And I go back to what Mr. Bowman said, is it seems like the workforce, right, the consumer of the product, the student, right, is wanting more skilled trades. And I can only speak for my state, really, in my district. I mean, I was out this morning and they're begging for people, pardon me, in the skilled trades industry. Is there some sort of marriage that we can do between the college and the skilled trades? And I think you've talked a little bit about that, but I think that really is critical, and then, because we talk about, having free college tuition and whatnot. And let's remember, nothing is free, right? The professors surely aren't teaching for free. And at the end of the day, somebody has to pay those professors, and it's typically the taxpayers' money that Congress is appropriating. So I'm just wondering, are we truly providing, and this isn't a knock on anyone, I don't want it to come across that way, are we truly providing a product that the community wants? And anyone can answer that, because people in my community don't need another LS&A degree. They need somebody who knows how to weld or no. I'm just wondering.
I'd like to respond to that. The HBCU community has 17 two-year institutions, community and technical colleges, that as with their four-year counterparts, they're punching above their weight. They're graduating disproportionate percentages of persons who are trained in health and health professions and health paraprofessionals. They are in technology. They're in all of the growth and high needs areas. And in the time—
So you're producing welders, you're producing—
We're producing welders. And
okay.
In many cases, in J.F. Drake, for example, their classes are ranking above their counterparts in passing the licensure exams that are required once they get there.
So journeymen's, apprenticeships, all that.
Yes, those types of things. Yes.
Okay.
Although
That's exciting. That's very exciting.
I think I agree with your general concept that we've got to have jobs, but I think that you've got to have people prepared for the workforce, people with strong character, and people committed to service. So I think that's one of the things that HBCUs provide that makes them unique. Yes, we absolutely are preparing folks for the workforce, but we're building character and encouraging.
Well, that comes with
service.
discipline and showing up on time. And I think you would also agree with me that it is critical for us to teach our children how to think, not what to think, so they can come up with these critical thinking skills on their own. So with that, I yield back my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bonamici of Oregon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I ask my questions, I wanted to speak to the gainful employment rule, which was brought up in the witnesses' testimony and answers. Students attend career education programs with the expectation that they're going to receive a quality experience. It's going to lead them to gainful employment. But many of those career education programs, particularly those at for-profit institutions, are not preparing students for gainful employment in their chosen field, leaving them with debt they can't pay. So to protect students and taxpayers, the Obama administration implemented the gainful employment rule. And that was so students would not take on debt for higher education that did not lead to good jobs. And that rule worked. Data showed that institutions were starting to reduce tuition costs and phase out those low quality programs because of the rule. Yet Secretary DeVos completely rescinded the rule to the detriment of students and taxpayers. And contrary to the testimony given today, HBCUs were not negatively impacted by the gainful employment rules because of their student demographics. According to data from the Department of Education, the percentage of students of color in an institution does not have a meaningful impact on the institution's debt to earnings ratio. So what the gainful employment regulation did was protect students, particularly low-income students and students of color, from overpriced, low-quality programs, particularly at the predatory for-profit colleges. So I'm glad the Biden administration has indicated they're going to re-regulate and bring back the gainful employment rule, and I look forward to working with the committee and the administration on this important issue. Now, turning to the questions, we know that it's been established HBCUs are tremendously important to our nation's higher education system, and yet, as Chair Wilson described and several of our witnesses confirmed, they have been historically underfunded, with endowments lagging behind HBCUs, lagging behind non-HBCUs by as much as 70%. HBCUs are less likely to be able to buffer lower federal and state funding levels. And I want to note that the most important role of the federal government in education, and therefore our role as policymakers, is to advance equity. We know HBCUs have played a critical role in providing higher education opportunities for centuries, long before President Johnson emphasized equity of opportunity with the important Higher Education Act in the mid-1960s. So today, our institutions of higher education, especially HBCUs, need resources so they can continue to serve as these engines of economic mobility for the students they serve. But unfortunately, not all of my colleagues agree with me, and some have stated that they oppose additional federal investments in HBCUs. So Dr. Perry, what would you say to someone who, despite the facts we've laid out today and established in the testimony, continue to argue that we do not need to increase investments in HBCUs and other under-resourced institutions?
Well, I just find it hypocritical that many of the people who say they are into expanding the economy are against investing in HBCUs in the areas in particular they're strong at. You know, we're making the argument that for the workforce as a whole, we need STEM graduates. We should be investing in those institutions that produce STEM graduates at a higher level. The other side to this is that there are many institutions that do not graduate Black students well. And I can easily make the argument, the reason why you see an increase in Black HBCUs is because the PWIs of the world are not doing their jobs.
I appreciate it. And Dr. Perry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I really want to try to get in another question to President Glover. We know that Tennessee State University is doing a lot to help students who arrive on campus in need of additional support. Perhaps students who have attended under-resourced K-12 schools. So what are you doing to make sure the faculty and staff are prepared to meet the needs of those students who have been through underfunded schools in the K-12 system? And also, if you could add, in the remaining time, how would the enactment of the Build Back legislation, Build Back Better legislation, with policies like the extension of the child tax credit, affordable childcare, and universal preschool for 3- and 4-year-olds affect children who may be future HBCU students?
Well, I'd like to just tell you and say that we are doing quite a bit at Tennessee State for students who come to us who are not prepared. If that's your question, who are not prepared. We focus on education, assuming that the students are going to get the right knowledge, the variety of cognitive and communication skills, and focus on educating them throughout their college career. And so I kind of forgot, it was a pretty long question. I kind of forgot.
I'm sorry. I know. The Build Back Better legislation includes policies like affordable childcare, extension of the child tax credit, and universal preschool. How would that affect future HBCU students?
Oh, it affects it in a positive way. The Build Back Better Act overall has shown that they have a real appreciation of what HBCUs provide and the nature of the students who attend HBCUs. And so I think each one of those elements has a positive thrust to it that will assist HBCUs as they grow and develop.
Thank you so much, Dr. Glover. And I apologize for going over, Madam Chair. I yield back.
This is a wild hearing. Okay. And next, Dr. Fox.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, Madam Chair. I'm prepared to ask my question. Thank you very much. Ms. Saylor, according to data from the Office of Federal Student Aid, the cohort default rate for HBCUs was 13.4% in FY 2018, the highest among all institutional sectors, and nearly twice that of the national average for schools. I'll note these default rates are higher than proprietary institutions, which Democrats continually demonize as failing their students. I know that students tend to rely on federal aid at a higher rate, but that should not impact their ability to pay back these loans after school, especially since today we've heard so much about the high percentages of professional people who graduate from HBCUs. So could you comment on that, please?
Where is the mic?
Yes, Dr. Fox. As we look at the demographics of the majority of students attending HBCUs, we see that there are a lot of people who are first-time college attendees, if you will, to graduation. And I think this issue goes back to what happens at the moment that one is accepting a loan. And I think it's critically important that we look at ways to make sure that the financial literacy upskill component is happening at the same time. Dr. Glover spoke to that in terms of what she's doing at her university in order to help students make those wise decisions. I think we've got young people who are trying to make decisions for themselves. They don't always have the same consultation from family members who've gone through a similar experience. And so therefore they're trailblazing. And I think—
So could I follow up on that a little bit? So should Congress do more to hold schools with poor student outcomes accountable, both HBCUs and non-HBCUs alike?
I think that Congress should be working with and looking at policies that encourage both HBCUs and non-HBCUs to provide that financial literacy and counseling as young people are trying to make decisions that are beyond where they can see at the moment to give additional support.
Ms. Saylor, institutions of higher education received a significant addition of federal support in response to the challenges posed by COVID-19. HBCUs and MSIs received nearly $6 billion in targeted and additional direct support. This influx of taxpayer dollars was both unprecedented in its size and the speed at which it was delivered, which makes oversight of such funds more critical than ever to ensure taxpayer dollars are being used as intended to help students. Do you have any indication, since this committee has had no oversight on how this money is being spent, do you have any indication as to how HBCUs have used their COVID relief funds, and have some used them more effectively than others? And I only have a little over a minute, so I need a quick answer.
Okay, yes. I mean, what we see across the board is HBCUs are trying to meet needs of the students who are in dire need during this moment that we're having as a nation. We see that Dillard and Howard and North Carolina A&T, for example, are few institutions that have created safe funds and grants from private donors as well to help pay tuition and fees. We see that we also see other universities like Wilberforce University bolstering private scholarship. And so those additional funds have, I think, helped give enough cushion in order to look at diversifying other avenues to bring money into those institutions.
Well, over the past year, we've also seen several reports of HBCUs clearing the account balances of their students using COVID relief funding. Do you think this is a smart way to teach students fiscal responsibility? And what was the justification for this use? How was the determination made which borrowers to cover? We need to know more about whether this is an effective use of taxpayer dollars, or is this simply transfer of wealth?
Yes, Dr. Fox, I think, we as a nation experienced a global pandemic, something no one was expecting. And I don't think we got it all right. And I think as the law allowed for flexibility for HBCUs to look at what kind of processes they were going to use, I think we've got to be able to go back and insist on the transparency of how that was interacting and interfacing, so that as we move forward, we can make sure that the models that work are going to be continued to be used, and those things that didn't work so well will be corrected.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. And now the chair of the full committee, the distinguished Dr. Scott of Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And certainly I want to thank you for convening this hearing, and I want to thank our witnesses for being with us today. My family is very closely associated with HBCUs. My father, mother, two brothers and a sister all attended HBCUs, including Howard, Hampton, Fisk, Virginia State, Morehouse, and Spelman. My great-grandfather, Nicholas Roberts, after whom I'm named, was the interim president at Shaw. So I'm very closely associated with HBCUs. Let me first make a quick comment about a comment made by the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks, about what it sounded like short-term Pell, and that we hadn't taken up his bill. Probably the reason we haven't taken it up is because every higher education bill and every workforce development bill that we've considered in the last 2 or 3 years has included a provision for short-term Pell, so that his views are well taken, and we will look forward to working with him on that. Ms. Glover, Dr. Glover, thank you for your testimony. As several have indicated, in the last couple of years, there's been unprecedented support for HBCUs. can you compare the funding that Tennessee State got in the last year and a half compared to what it usually gets historically, and what you were able to do with the money?
Sure. Tennessee State received funds in 3 categories last year. There's the first higher education emergency fund, relief funds, the CARES Act that went when half went to students and half went to the university. But we gave quite a significant number to our students. That was $23 million. Then we got the second round of the Relief Supplemental Act, and we got $33 million. And then the American Rescue Plan, that was a $58 million. So a total of $115 million came in on an emergency basis. And so they were used to provide directly to students and personal assistance to students. I think that number was 11 million. And then there was tuition assistance to students impacted by the pandemic, direct to student assistance. That was 20 million, almost 21 million. Then scholarships of 22 million. The emergency housing of over 2 million. The technical, the enhancements to online and hybrid learning, but students had to leave and go home all of a sudden with no technology devices, limited to no connectivity to the broadband. So we had to provide technology for the students. They had cell phones, but you know, cell phones only go so far. You can go into Zoom and the online learning in that way, but you can't do the papers and modeling. Cell phones won't go far enough. So we provide technology devices. So it was so much for the equipment we had to get, the PPE. And so then we're there for this fall, this semester and next semester, there's another 40 million. We're still spending, it's being encumbered. So we've actually spent all of the money has either been spent in total or it's all been encumbered. And we are most appreciative of all the funds. I hasten to say it was emergency funding. And that's what made us so appreciative, because we were in a state of emergency.
Well, it sounds like you almost got as much from COVID relief bills as you got from the state of Tennessee last year and a half.
Indeed. So,
thank you.
It was kind of glorified.
I'm going to ask you a question to respond on the record, and that is, what can we do to actually increase endowments? I don't have much time to get a coherent answer to that question, but if you can provide that for the record, I'd appreciate it, because that's one thing that has been commented on, and we ought to be able to do something about that. And finally, Ms. Baskerville, do you have any comments about the present status of HBCU litigation in terms of whether or not these consent decrees are still in effect and whether states are in compliance?
The consent decrees are still in effect, and they're still in compliance with the Maryland case. We now have litigation and the results of that suggest what the states must prove. So what we found in Maryland case was that, yes, there's still vestiges of discrimination. Among the many are infrastructure and also duplication. But what it also did was put out a roadmap so that the other 18 public institutions that are in states where they maintain a dual and unequal higher education system will know what to do. We can now take this and use it with the other decrees. But I do believe that we need to work to make sure that the Office of Civil Rights has a process in place that doesn't force you to be in litigation or pre-litigation for 40 years. We need at some point to intervene once the Office of Civil Rights find that they're in violation and they put in place the decree. If they do not comply, they need to withhold funds. That appears to be the only thing they'll respond to.
Well, thank you. And I just for the record, let you know that the chair, Representative Wilson, and I just recently wrote these Office of Civil Rights and Department of Education, asking them about the status of this litigation and what they're doing about states that are not in compliance. So we're following up on that, and we appreciate your testimony. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now, Ms. Letlow of Louisiana. Welcome, Ms. Letlow.
Thank you. And thank you to all the witnesses for taking the time to testify before the committee today. Louisiana is home to several distinguished historically Black colleges and universities. HBCUs in my state are nationally recognized for their academic programs and contributions to research. I am especially proud that one of these outstanding HBCUs is located in Louisiana's 5th Congressional District. Grambling State University has been educating students in North Louisiana since 1901. The university offers many strong degree programs, but the school is especially known for its nursing, computer science, and teacher education majors. And I can't forget to mention their world-famed Tiger Marching Band. This summer, I had the opportunity to visit Grambling's campus to learn about their academic programs and priorities. I was especially impressed with their commitment to recruiting Black male students to pursue careers as educators at elementary and secondary schools. Nationally, less than 2% of the public school teachers are Black males, while over 50% of the public school students are students of color. Grambling is seeking to address this discrepancy by launching a targeted leadership program to increase the number of Black male students earning a teaching degree. It is encouraging to see higher education institutions find innovative ways to address workforce issues, and I am proud to support Grambling's efforts. I'd like to now direct my question to Ms. Saylor. Throughout your testimony, you highlight the importance for HBCUs to leverage public-private partnerships. I believe there is immense value in establishing these partnerships. What are some examples of successful collaboration between HBCUs and the private sector? Are there barriers preventing HBCUs from leveraging these partnerships? And if so, what can be done to remove them?
Yes, thank you for your question. I actually worked on many years ago a proposal, and we almost got it done with NASCAR and HBCUs. And I'll tell you what was successful in that is in terms of being able to connect the resources, the innovation in terms of giving the students the hands-on experience of being able to work in mechanics, if you will, and looking at the engineering degree. And what is essential, I think, as you look at success in terms of the connectivity of both the private and the public sector coming together to try to execute towards an incredible outcome, is the ability, as those projects are coming into fruition, that they don't get cut off when an administration changes, if you will. And so I think where we are able to keep a certain amount of continuity, where you've got the three parts coming together, it is going to be very helpful in being able to not only measure the long-term outcomes of what can happen, but also being able to get to a place of scaling those incredible models out in terms of its capacity to really return on the investment that's made from the partnerships.
That's a wonderful example, Ms. Saylor. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Ms. Letlow. And let me just let you know that what you said was so amazing, how you started your testimony. That's why the Congressional Black Caucus has established the Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys. And we agree with you about the teaching shortage, the college attendance, everything that impacts Black boys. Thank you so much for your testimony. And now, Ms. Adams of North Carolina.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your work on HBCUs. Thank you for holding today's long-awaited, much-needed hearing on HBCUs. And to each of our esteemed witnesses, thank you for being here today. I do ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the following items: a 2018 Government Accountability Office report that speaks to the improved participation in the education of HBCUs capital financing program, a 2021 report published by the Century Foundation entitled Achieving Financial Equity and Justice for HBCUs, a political news article urging Congress to examine the importance of investing in the research and development infrastructure of HBCUs, and a letter from 37 member institutions of the UNCF, urging Congress to improve reconciliation language affecting HBCUs, and finally, a report, Blacks in STEM, Understanding the Issues by NAFIO. It's no secret, Madam Chair, that I'm passionate about HBCUs. I'm an advocate. I'm a proud two-time graduate of North Carolina A&T State University, 40-year retired professor and administrator at Bennett College, both HBCUs. And so I remember my personal experiences when I came to Congress to vow to make things right for our HBCU experience. A significant piece of legislation I introduced in this Congress, HR 3294, the Ignite HBCU Excellence Act, which really has support from conservative senators to progressive Democrats, and it will revitalize and rejuvenate our HBCU campuses. My first question, HBCUs and other institutions of higher education are classified as minority serving institutions, or MSIs. So HBCUs and other institutions of higher education are often sorted into the same category for participation in programs and initiatives funded by the federal government. Dr. Baskerville, will you talk briefly about the similarities and differences between HBCUs and these other types of institutions, both in terms of historic funding and current financial status?
Yes, thank you so very much, Madam Chairwoman of the Bipartisan Caucus on HBCUs. There are similarities in that the HBCUs and TCUs and the MSIs, those are the demographic institutions, the Hispanic serving, the tribal college, the Anapieces and the PBIs. They're similar in the types of the students that they're graduating. They're different, tremendously different in their founding and their mission. HBCUs and tribal colleges and universities are mission-based, non-racial, non-ethnic institutions. They have no race criterion, no ethnic criterion, but they have a mission of educating, in the case of HBCUs, the progeny of the American slave system and others. And HBCUs have done that since their founding. They've been open to all persons who want to excel. And a question was asked about diversity of thought. HBCUs believe in diversity of thought, race, ethnicity, creed, and the entire gamut of diversity. Our
so let me move on to Dr. Baskerville. I only have a couple of minutes. So
yes, ma'am.
Can you speak to why HBCU funding should be decoupled from MSI funding?
Yes, it must be decoupled because HBCUs are not like MSIs, and they have a history, a special relationship that the United States continues to acknowledge based on slavery, the 200 years of slavery, 200 years since slavery, and the lingering vestiges of discrimination. No other cohort of American colleges has that. For that reason, we cannot be clumped with other institutions who are doing a good job, and NAFIO has fought to get them recognized as geographic minority serving institutions. But because of the uniqueness, the gross underfunding, the vestiges that linger today, they must be decoupled and special programs established for HBCUs because of that.
Let me ask Dr. Glover, your testimony, you spoke about land-grant institutions not receiving proper matching funding for decades. So how has the lack of matching funds to land-grant institutions negatively impacted the resources available to students at these land-grant institutions?
It's had a profound effect in that students have not been able to engage in the programming that other schools had, the similar peer institutions, or predominant white institutions. They were not able to do the extension work they could have been doing. For example, in Nashville, there's never the extension work that's fully funded for TSU as is for the other land grant in Tennessee. Not even.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I'm out of time. I'm going to yield back.
Ms. Adams, whatever other questions you may have, submit them to the record and we'll have the witnesses respond to you in writing.
Yes, ma'am, I'll do that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
To all committee members in writing. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, Ms. McBath from Georgia. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman, for holding this really crucial discussion on the continued essential role that historically Black colleges and universities play in higher education, as well as the continued need to strengthen and support HBCUs. And I also thank our witnesses for sharing their time with us today. As an alumna of an HBCU, Virginia State University, go Trojans, have to get that in there. I know intimately the role that HBCUs play, not just in individual students' lives, but also in America's higher education system. HBCUs served for many decades as one of the only means for African Americans and other minorities to gain a college education. While many educational doors have opened since, HBCUs still serve a very vital role in educating, nurturing, and advancing America's students. Without an HBCU education, this woman that you see before you today may never have gone on to become a United States Congresswoman, representing the great people of Georgia's 6th Congressional District. Nor perhaps would my colleagues be here with me today, Representatives Frederica Wilson and also Representative Alma Adams, both HBCU representatives and graduates. Further, the nation may never have had United States Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, a two-time graduate of HBCUs, nor the first female Vice President Kamala Harris, also an HBCU alum. In my state of Georgia, we are home to 9 HBCUs, the third most in the country, tied with Texas. The United Negro College Fund found that in 2018, Georgia's HBCUs they generated actually $1.3 billion in total economic impact to the state and generated over 12,000 jobs. HBCUs have provided so much to this country and its accomplishments, and that's why it's imperative we in turn provide continued funding to HBCUs. By doing so, we invest not just in these institutions, but in the future of this country. Now, my question is for Dr. Baskerville. Research shows that HBCUs have higher success rates when compared to other four-year institutions with similar enrollments of Pell students. After controlling for Pell enrollments, the average institutional graduation rate for Black students at HBCUs was 38%, compared with 32% for non-HBCUs. What is it about the academic experience that's provided by HBCUs that helps students attending these institutions to have better outcomes than their peers that are attending non-HBCUs?
Thank you so very much for that question, Congresswoman Macbeth. HBCUs are, most importantly, they're offering the diverse courses and curricula that will prepare the students for tomorrow's labor force, tomorrow's service corps, and the like. But they're doing it, many of them, in smaller, nurturing environments. They're doing it in environments where proportionately more of the faculty than you find at historically white institutions are persons of color, persons who perhaps came from their background, their culture, they share a common ethos, but they're bringing to the table the academic piece, but they also have the civic and the service and the spiritual aspect, spiritual meaning, encouraging students to celebrate something above and beyond themselves. Additionally, they are richly diverse. HBCUs have about 70% students who are African ancestred and about 30 who are not. Great diversity ratings, and they're improving as others are. The faculty are even more diverse. And so those who believe in an excellent environment, smaller environments, costs are contained, and diversity, look to HBCUs where we welcome persons of all backgrounds, all interests, and certainly those who believe in different philosophies, as was discussed previously.
Thank you so much. And I yield the rest of what little time I have to my colleague, Alma Adams.
Thanks. I'd like to thank the young lady for yielding. Dr. Glover, you've talked about the neglect that our campuses have. What financial resources are required, in your opinion, to rectify this neglect?
On my campus, we're we're seeking to get the 544 million that is taken, that we are out of. And so that we're in arrears in Tennessee. But if you look across the board on HBCUs, the neglect in deferred maintenance, the infrastructure, the academic programs, it's going to average a significant number across the campuses.
Thank you. I yield back. I'm out of time, Madam Chairman.
Thank you so much. And we'll ask Ms. Glover if she would respond in writing to your question so that all of the committee members will have that response. Right now, I have to make an announcement that is beyond our control. We tried to make this work, but Dr. Glover has a meeting at the White House, the Vice President of the United States and the National Panhellenic Council. So we're gonna excuse her now as she serves in both capacities. Dr. Glover, you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have a text from the White House. So we'll proceed with the next committee person, Ms. Hayes of Connecticut.
Thank you.
Ms. Hayes of Connecticut. Ms. Stevens of Michigan.
Madam Chair, Ms. Stevens is here.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much for letting me wave on to today's incredible hearing. The materials and the testimony were just instrumental. And I want to thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and just all members of the subcommittee. As we've discussed for a century and a half, our HBCUs have just been a critical source of producing workforce diversity. And I'm so grateful that we are here today addressing their systemic underutilization and underfunding, especially as it pertains to R&D and innovation and other critical economic development needs. I'm also a proud co-sponsor of the legislation from our esteemed chair of another incredible committee here on Ed and Labor, her legislation to make historic investments in HBCUs. And I would like to take my time and yield it to Congresswoman Alma Adams from the great state of North Carolina.
Thank you very much. I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I do want to talk a little bit about the Research One institutions. And so, Dr. Baskerville, of the 131 schools that are classified as Research One institutions by the Carnegie Classification of Institutions of Higher Ed, none of those are HBCUs. There are 11 HBCUs, including my alma mater, North Carolina A&T, which is the largest public university, which are among 135 schools classified as R2 or Research 2 universities, indicating that they do have high research activities. So what actions can the federal government take, Dr. Baskerville, both in the short term and in the long term to develop multiple R1 HBCUs?
Thank you very much. In the short term, we need very much to have investments in our infrastructures that will make sure that they have broadband and laboratories and all of the things that are essential to continuing to do the work that they're doing as very impressive Research 2 institutions, but they must be able to have the roads, the laboratories, and community access for laboratories as well. So you need that in the short term. You also need, in I think a short term, about $200 million in an EPSCoR-like program that will bring to bear the resources of the Department of Defense, National Science Foundation, and the other scientific departments and agencies to put resources toward them in recognition of the fact that we're just 11 institutions and they're principally responsible for graduating 42% of Blacks with advanced degrees in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, with advanced degrees in education professions, and disproportionate in health professions. We need them more than ever. We see what they're doing with woefully low investments. And EPSCoR is something, a program that the Department of Defense is presently involved in with other scientific entities for the express purpose of bringing online additional institutions. It would be tremendous to start with HBCUs because of their output, because of the disproportionate output. They also have success rate in higher than any others in moving persons from the lowest 20% of the quartile up to the top. Someone asked earlier about economic impact.
Thank you so much. In the last few minutes, few seconds that we have, I just want to mention, because I've heard several of our speakers talk about not being able to find students of color, African-American students. And I just want to put out there that the Bipartisan HBCU Caucus does have the Partnership Challenge. We now have almost 70 corporate individuals and entities involved, where we help make those partnerships work with these institutions that we are in touch with each and every day. So I just want to certainly invite any of the corporate folks who are listening to become members of the Bipartisan HBCU Partnership, because it really does work, and it is making a difference for our schools and for the corporates. And I thank the lady for yielding back. I yield, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. And now, Mr. Mfume of Maryland, thank you for being with us the entire meeting. We appreciate it. Your support.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And
we know your background. We know why you've been on the whole time.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And my thanks also to the ranking minority member for holding this hearing. Obviously, I think it's very, very important, and so does everyone on the call. Otherwise, we would not be here. I do want to preface my remarks, Madam Chair, by calling your attention to a New York Times article, rather lengthy, and will soon probably be sort of the history of Fisk University, because it details the celebration and the significance of the 150th anniversary of the Fisk Jubilee Singers and what they and that university have meant to this country. It's a great, great article, and I would commend everybody's attention to it. I do want to also, if I might, in a sense of being redundant and transparent, say a couple of things, but I would be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge Representative Adams for her stewardship of HBCU issues and education issues in general over so many years, and to also commend and thank the chair, Bobby Scott, for his leadership in this area and the fact that there's not been a significant piece of legislation dealing with higher ed or pre-K through 12 that he has not been a part of over all these many years. So thank you both for that. To be transparent, I am a graduate of Historically Black College, Morgan State University here in Baltimore. Was able to find a way to matriculate, and at a very tough time, I got a degree, and it prepared me later for my other higher education work and my other attempts to matriculate. We were formed 4 years after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and have been graduating students, as many of you are aware, with your own institutions for a long, long time. We are hopefully 2 years, maybe 3 years away from gaining R1 status through Carnegie. We're working very, very hard to do that. We've got a AAA bond rating. We've produced more Fulbright scholars than 90% of the other institutions that exist. And we are on our way in many respects to opening and creating a school of osteopathic medicine to complement the other aspects of the campus. I wanted to say all that to say that there was preparation there for me, as there is for so many young people today, by going to a historically Black college and university, oftentimes because they have not been able to go anywhere else. I do want to, and I don't have questions for the witnesses. I want to thank them for their testimony, and I wanted to just kind of react and respond to a couple of things that I heard, Madam Chair. I think that it's important for us to pay attention to this whole notion of research dollars. as was brought up before by Mr. Perry. So whether it's NIH, National Science Foundation, NASA, or anyone else that's granting these research dollars, that competitive, quote, competition really has to be competitive and free of influence, because oftentimes institutions get through the first round, and then the second round, which is under less scrutiny, is when the decision is oftentimes made, and it's made based on whether or not you're familiar with this school or that name or something else. And so we see this awkward shift that has gone on for years in terms of those research dollars. Patents is another area that I hope the committee focuses on, because there's a great deal of funding there and a great deal of opportunity, but more importantly, there's a great deal that can be contributed by Black colleges and universities. And on the matter of deferred maintenance, to the extent that we're able to pass the Build Back Better Act, I'm hoping that, and perhaps it might be instructive to not just hope, but to also signify or signal to college presidents all over the place that some of that money that's free to be used without a lot of discretion ought to go straight toward deferred maintenance, because we can't keep deferring deferred maintenance. Any college president like Ms. Manning and any others will tell you that is simply something that's going to happen. It's going to happen in the worst way if we don't take care of it. I know there was a comment earlier about why there are more Black women in these colleges and universities as opposed to Black men. I think 35 to 65%, something like that. Let me just remind you that prior to 1976, for the previous 100 years, from 1876, it was just the reverse. In those days, it was chauvinism and sexism. And these days, it's peer pressure, it's prison, and a lot of other things that are intangible that oftentimes equate and give us those kinds of numbers. So if we look at the Fordyce decision in Mississippi 12 years ago, or the Maryland decision where we took the state to court for 16 years before getting a $577 settlement, one thing is clear, and that is the fight for colleges and universities who happen to be HBCUs is in desperate need for more persons to line up as allies. And HBCUs, this will be my final point, Madam Chair, there's nothing inconsistent about that. People will say, well, you don't need the historically Black college and university. You don't need them. Their days have outlived them, and we can do things better because you can go anywhere. Well, you really can't oftentimes go anywhere because the prejudices that exist that are below the surface that go to a number of intangibles that have been spoken about today. So as long as there's a Harvard and a Yale that remain essentially WASP, even though others may attend, that's not considered inconsistent. Even though there's a Brandeis and Yeshiva that remain essentially Jewish, even though others may attend, that's not considered inconsistent. And even though there is a Catholic U and a Notre Dame that remain essentially Catholic, even though others may attend, then logic tells me that we ought to have a Morgan and a Morehouse and a Hampton and a Howard and a Fisk and NC, AT&T, and other colleges and universities that are holding down a historic mission to make sure that no one is left behind. I don't have any time to yield back, Madam Chair, because I've exhausted it. Thank you for allowing me to get in a few things at the conclusion of this meeting. I appreciate it.
That was a keynote address. So I will keep that. It has been recorded, and you will hear it over and over and over as we move forward with the Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys. And you are way out of time. Yes. I remind my colleagues that pursuant to committee practice, materials for submission for the hearing record must be submitted to the committee clerk within 14 days following the last day of the hearing. So by close of business on October 20th, 2021, preferably in Microsoft Word format, the material submitted must address the subject of the hearing. Only a member of the subcommittee or an invited guest may submit materials for inclusion in the hearing record. Documents are limited to 50 pages each. Documents longer than 50 pages will be incorporated into the record by way of an interlink that you must provide to the committee clerk within the required time frame. But please recognize that in the future, that link may no longer work. Pursuant to House rules and regulations, items for the record should be submitted to the clerk electronically by emailing submissions to edandlabor.hearings. Again, I want to thank these amazing, headstrong witnesses for their participation today. You were fantastic. We learned all that we possibly could digest about HBCUs, and I appreciate your participation. Members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for you, and we ask the witnesses to please respond to those questions in writing. The hearing record will be held open for 14 days in order to receive those responses. I remind my colleagues that pursuant to committee practice, witness questions for the hearing record must be submitted to the majority committee staff or committee clerk within 7 days. The questions submitted must address the subject matter of the hearing. I now recognize the distinguished ranking member, Dr. Murphy, for a closing statement. Dr. Murphy?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And let me just say, I want to say to my colleague, Representative Mifune, that I think those were fabulous comments. I agree with you, Chairwoman Wilson. I do agree that when monies are spent, I do believe that we ought to deal with deferred maintenance, because so many of the colleges and institutions, not just HBCUs, really need that capital improvement. And I think it needs it a lot more than going into further programs. So I applaud that statement and the comment. And I want to thank all the witnesses today. It was a very, very good discussion. And I appreciate the chairman for calling this. I'm just a few other points just to finish up. While it's important that Congress continues to recognize how HBCUs have provided students, it's equally important to know that Congress will support their mission. Over the last 18 months, these institutions were provided billions upon billions of taxpayer dollars, which served as a temporary lifeline to mitigate what was happening during the pandemic. Without a doubt, colleges, institutions, businesses, churches, you name it, benefited and are alive today because of the monies that Congress appropriated. But the fact that the matter is the higher education is changing. More and more students are demanding learning opportunities and credential offerings outside of the traditional four-year model, and COVID-19 only really accelerated that trend. This will require higher education institutions to change as well, including HBCUs. Simply providing more and more money is not the answer, in my opinion, but calls for additional funding are often ignore the interests of the taxpayers providing this. We have to be smart about the money that is being given to colleges, institutions, and accountability needs to be paramount. The taxpayer wallets are not unlimited. Rather, we should build off the initiatives of the previous administration, in my opinion, encourage HBCUs to be innovative, just like every other institution, such as fostering public-private partnerships that'll provide a much more stable and reliable business model that gives educational opportunities to the students, more reliable, honestly, than the federal government. Doing so will ensure their longevity so that they continue to serve their students for generations to come. Thank you again to the witnesses. I believe a lot of great comments occurred today. And thank you, Madam Chairman. I will yield back.
Thank you. I want to thank the witnesses again, and I now recognize myself for the purpose of making a closing statement. And before I do that, just keep in mind that 1886, the first HBCU was built. And some of the dormitories, some of the student union buildings remain the same. And we have to keep that in mind. When I went to university, Fisk, we had a shower on the hallway, a group shower, a group bathroom. Now, our schools that we have to compete with, each dormitory room has a bathroom. There were we had no kitchen. Now our new dormitories on our competing institutions have kitchens, a group kitchen. I had a little tiny refrigerator and a little tiny hot plate. There were no, nothing else, just a little hot plate that sometimes would cause fires in the dormitories. So these HBCUs have not been able to keep up for these centuries that they have been built. So let's just keep that in mind. This is a way to bring all of this to the forefront and a way for all of us to know and understand that we're not being selfish. We're being pragmatic and realistic. And we, as members of Congress, have to make a difference. I want to thank the witnesses, and I want you to know that today we reflected on the historical roots of historically Black colleges and universities and examined their continued contributions to our higher education system. For generations, HBCUs have provided our students, particularly Black and low-income students, with a supportive community and opportunities for economic mobility. Unfortunately, as our witnesses shared, and our congressional members, HBCUs continue to experience persistent challenges, including systemic underfunding, chronic state disinvestment, and discriminatory funding policies have left HBCUs to achieve far more with far less. We must continue to invest in HBCUs and their students. To this end, Congress has delivered $6.5 billion to HBCUs over the last year and a half, and most recently through the committee's portion of the Build Back Better Act, we approved over $30 billion in funding that will help support these institutions. However, far more, let's keep in mind, far more is needed to correct decades, centuries of underfunding and historic inequities. And I will continue to work with my colleagues on this committee, Education and Labor, the entire committee, to champion solutions to these pressing challenges. In light of the unique mission and history of HBCUs, I firmly believe that investing in these institutions and their students is one of the most significant actions we can take to right the wrongs of the past. In our communities, there's a lot of discussion and debate about reparations taking place in the African American community in a variety of settings, from the beauty shops to the barber shops to political and social circles. Wherever I go, that's all people want to ask me about. Congresswoman Wilson, why do you want to study reparations? What are you going to learn? Study how? And I've always felt that the solution must be education. Me, that's Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. So soon, I plan to file legislation that will help students who have been impacted by the legacy of slavery to cover the cost of attendance to any of our nation's HBCUs. And I know every student doesn't want to attend an HBCU, but those that do, I consider this investment to be long overdue and would ensure that any descendant of enslaved Americans can access a debt-free higher education at a world-class institution. I have been even toying with the idea of targeting the most endangered human being in America, Black boys. Please, I ask you to let me know of your thoughts. Mr. Chairman, once I file this bill, I hope we can bring this bill to a markup. Congress has a responsibility to address the enduring impact of slavery and decades of discriminatory policy, including how these factors have contributed to a sizable racial wealth gap. I look forward to working with my colleagues on this committee and all of the relevant stakeholders to ensure that HBCUs not only survive, but continue to thrive and grow for decades to come. We will need innovative and transformative solutions to truly provide these historic institutions with the support that they need and deserve. Thank you again to our witnesses. If there is no further business, without objection, this subcommittee stands adjourned.